Hi, Simon. Nice to see you today.
Hi, Lindsay. How are you doing?
I'm doing really great. It's nice to see you. So, Simon and I came together. He messaged me on Instagram. He saw me on Raylan's channel, and I was really excited to speak to you, Simon, because through all my interactions with my clients, I've heard such great things about you. You give a lot of free content on your Facebook group and have been very helpful to a lot of people. So, thank you for all the contribution to this community that you've done so far.
You're welcome, and thanks for that. And likewise, Lindsay, as I say, I watched some of your videos. I know you've got a podcast, which is amazing. So it's fantastic to make contact with other people in this space.
Yeah, it's nice to get together and talk to other coaches. And of course, Simon and I have both been through MECFS ourselves, so we know what it's like. So today we're going to talk about some of our aha moments, our biggest light bulb moments. And we thought it'd be nice to share both of our top three things that really propelled us towards recovery. So what do you think about starting about with Simon? You want to start with one of yours?
Sure. Yeah. And before we dive into that, do you want to just say briefly, because I don't really know your story, and I'm happy just to briefly
Sure.
share mine, but do you want to just share a little bit about your, story?
Yeah, sure. So just briefly, I it was the end of 2015. I was finishing up my master's degree in public health and I was so stressed writing my thesis. I also got lice because my roommate was a teacher and brought home lice. So you can just imagine how you're just constantly worried about the like itchiness and are they still there? That hypervigilance that goes along with this illness.
Yeah.
I had a breakup at the time, and then I kept getting strep throat over and over. And then after all that, my body just collapsed. It was just done. Like I literally handed in my thesis, and the next day I had no energy and it would
Right.
not come back. And I just kept getting more and more symptoms. And I kept going to the doctor, and they'd, they shrug, shrug, shrug. I have no idea what's happening. And that happened for months and months until I had to stop working. And it was so bad. I'd just come home and I'd go straight to bed and I'd be crying and crying because I had no energy. And then I took a summer off. I started to feel a bit better. So I, of course, went right back to get find a job again. And I crashed again really hard after a few weeks into my new job. And that's when I was diagnosed with MECFS. And really, the diagnosis propelled me into that stress of searching Facebook groups and searching for all the ways to get better. And you just imagine how that propels the stress and the illness more, right? And it becomes a part of your identity. And I had to finish that contract. And then I didn't work for over 5 years. It just got worse and worse and worse to the point where I was living on a small island. I had isolated myself because I was like, I'm going to go heal in nature. But really, I just wanted to be away from my friends. Like, I just was so jealous and it was just too much for me. So I went to
Right.
this island and I was so lonely. And there was probably a lot of mold, let's be honest. And I was just worse and worse until the point where I was living alone, but pretty much bedbound. I was peeing in a
Right.
Tupperware container beside my bed. I was eating cans of tuna that I stacked up beside my bed. And then, like, once a day, I'd crawl to the bathroom. That was my life.
Right.
And that was kind of my rock bottom. And from there, I had to make some changes. We'll talk about the aha moments,
Yeah,
but
exactly,
that's
exactly.
when I started to get better is I found programs and I found community who had recovered and things totally changed from there. So
I
that's
mean,
kind of my story. It was in total about 7.5 years to get back to
right.
full health.
So
How
that,
about
yeah, that's
you?
interesting. Yeah, so this is going back some time. I went off sick in 1997, and literally I was working as a director of a housing trust. I realize now it's not what my calling, shouldn't have been doing that kind of work. What I love doing is working with people. Very interested in, the human being and the how
Mhm.
we do stuff and how we get in our own way, how we can support ourselves, our health and our happiness. So I went off sick. I was bedbound. I couldn't walk for a minute at times. I tried lots of things to try and get better. And it took kind of 8, 9 years. Even after 8, 9 years, I was still very fragile. I started learning some brain training techniques, and that propelled me forwards. I got me back to work. Started working again in kind of 2006. So that's kind of quite a long time ago, but I've still been learning lots about how to, you know, optimize your health and well-being. So shall I kick off
Yeah,
with
let's go into
this
the
one?
light
All
bulb
right.
moments. Sure.
So for me, the first thing was really understanding that my mind can change my brain and change the way I respond to stresses, and that can help me heal.
Mm,
I suppose I had an understanding that stress activates the fight or flight. I knew that a bit of stress is okay if it's for a
yeah.
short period, but a lot of stress for a long period of time is not so good. But I wasn't realizing the impact of being in a state of stress and not really understanding that how much stress I was in before I
Mm,
got sick
yeah.
and even whilst I was sick. And understanding that when we're in that state of stress, certain essential functions are switched off. Your body literally stops producing and storing energy.
Yeah.
It stops you from achieving restorative sleep, where the body does important repair work. It compromises your immune system. For some people, that means they're prone to infections. Others, their immune system's in overdrive. I was a kind of combination of both. Um, but starting to understand neuroplasticity, this idea that our brain can change and we can use our mind, we can train our mind to change our brain. I remember reading a book by health journalist Sharon Begley, I think her name is, who interviewed the Dalai Lama and spoke to lots of scientists. I started realizing, oh, wow, I can literally change my brain. And that means I respond differently to stressors. So, for me, I'm sure for many people, having symptoms, having lack of energy is a stressor.
Hmm.
Just understanding I could change the way I think about those symptoms, even changing the words by just using the word sensation. Suddenly that's less emotive. And I
Hmm.
could, even when, as I say it now, I can feel a kind of more, my body's a bit more relaxed
Hmm.
by just saying that word. Realizing I could change how I perceived those symptoms or sensations,
Hmm.
making that shift from this is a sign of danger, I'm in danger right now, to actually, this is my body just trying to protect me.
Hmm.
And it might be making a mistake. It might be, my mind might be activating the fight flight response, but right now I am safe
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
moment. Okay, I can relax because there's no tiger in the room.
Yeah.
Um, and another way I made that shift was just saying, okay, this symptom or sensation is just a message. It's like a call to action. And an
Hmm.
example of that is, I often used to get sore throats.
Me
And
too.
when I was working, I lost my voice for
Mm.
like 6 weeks, and that happened twice.
Mm.
And the second time it happened, I was chatting to my boss, who was a therapist, and I realized I was feeling a lot of rage because I wasn't being treated fairly at work.
Mm.
And within like 2 or 3 days, my voice came back.
Oh, interesting. Were you able
Yeah.
to get out the rage, like in a
Yeah,
way?
yeah. It's realizing, oh, actually, I'm feeling really angry and I need to do something
Mm.
constructive about this. As I say, that was one of the light bulb moments.
Yeah.
Um, and by doing those things, by making those kind of mental shifts, I was kind of building my mental resilience. I was realizing I was becoming more flexible in my thinking. And one of the things I realized is, I was focusing on the negative when I was noticing the symptom and creating alarm and catastrophizing. And I realized I could have a neutral response, or
Mm.
I could even have a positive response to those sensations. So, for example, one example I give is one time I was seeing a cognitive behavioral therapist, and she said, "What's something you'd love to do?" I said, "I'd love to go clubbing, but I can't because I've got this condition." And she was saying, well, why can't you rest for a couple of days? Just go for an hour or two.
Hmm.
And that's what I did. And afterwards, for the next week, I was feeling symptoms or sensations, but I had a big smile on my face because I just had
It
such a
is.
great time. So
Yeah,
I was absolutely relaxed about those sensations I was experiencing. And
good.
realizing, oh, by doing that, by changing the way I respond, I'm literally rewiring my brain, making it easier to respond in a more relaxed, resourceful way.
Good message. And I think there's so many people out there still who are so triggered by this idea that our brain is changing our physical health, and they make it into, you're saying that I don't have a physical illness, right? And we have to help them understand that it's all connected. It's all
Yeah.
connected with each other.
Yeah, and that's a really important point because my symptoms were real. They were really there,
Mhm.
but it's important to understand that our minds can affect our physiology.
Yeah.
Chess players can activate huge stress if they're playing in the Grandmasters competition.
Mm.
But as I say, when I started to realize I could just respond in a more relaxed way, the learning of, oh, actually, I'm activating my parasympathetic nervous system, and that is going to cause my body to heal. That's going to help my body produce and store energy. It's going to get my digestive system working properly because I had massive digestive issues when I had ME/CFS.
Me
I
too.
would eat twice as the amount of food that I eat now.
Mm.
Um, but it's important what you said about being triggered. There are times like I went out yesterday for dinner with some friends, but I really got massively triggered by a conversation we were having,
Mm.
and it's like, okay, there's still some more to learn here.
Mm.
Um, so anyway, that's my first light bulb moment.
Yeah, and that for me, like, just one thing to add on that is just like you said at the end, having that curious mindset instead of this, oh no, I must be right, and angry almost that you're devaluing my experience. Just
Yeah.
curious. Maybe if I looked at it in a different way, things would be a little different. Who knows? Instead of taking it as an offense, can be a really huge change in how you do it. So yeah, I totally agree. This was absolutely one for me as well. So going into my first one, I'm going to go more on a value-based one and what makes us valuable as a person. It's really interesting I've done level 2 now of pain reprocessing therapy. And, their big thing that they teach that causes a lot of symptoms are the big three: worry, pressure, and self-criticism. I would add with our illness symptom focus, but worry, pressure, and self-criticism are the big things that we're trying to retrain. And this pressure of, I should be able to work, I should be able to do this, I should be a person who does this, and this guilt that I'm a sick person. It's so interesting how much that actually affects us staying sick, ironically, because we're placing our value so much on what we do instead of who we are as people. And I remember the moment where that really dawned on me. And it was through an online program. I did CFS Health was one of them, where I heard this idea that we're putting too much value on what we do instead of who we are. And it was like a breath of fresh air. I was able to just finally like relieve this level of pressure I'd had on myself of what I should be doing in life. I mean, if you go back to hunter-gatherer times, there's very little we really should be doing, but societally, we've made this into such a pressure cooker of how we should be living our lives. The first thing we do when we introduce ourselves to someone is say our jobs, right? So it's
Yeah.
often very pressured to have a good job, look good. And for me, that pressure was very big in my life. I don't know if I got it so much from my family, but I had very high achieving friends. They all have masters and PhDs and great jobs. And we see a trend in people who get these illnesses are very intelligent, high achieving people who tend to
Yeah.
get these illnesses too, because like we should. I don't even think I would have got that master's degree if I didn't feel like, well, I should get a master's degree. What, it's not really that I necessarily wanted to or felt that that was my passion. It was that this feeling of should. And when we can start to transfer that energy that we're putting towards what we should be doing in life into valuing ourselves for who we are as a person, I'm funny, I'm kind, I'm compassionate, I'm so loving to my friends and my family, and that's what's important in life. And whether you're sick or not, and by taking that pressure off of healing, again, it just relieves so much, and your body can finally find that space to heal often. That was the case for me, at least. I think it was a
Yeah.
big aha moment for me.
That's great that you share that, because I just think it is so important. And that's my experience that, I lost my identity when I got sick.
Hmm.
Because my identity was wrapped up with what I did.
Hmm.
And it's when I kind of realized that kind of core friends still, hung around. And it's like, oh, okay, there's something about me that even without a job, my high flying friends are still kind of wanting to hang out, even though I'm quite limited in what I can do. I'm the one who goes home early and stuff. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's really important. And it's a great message, I think, for to get out there, because so many people I chat to have lost their sense of self.
Yeah, and it's a hard one to conquer, I still deal with it all the time when I'm, if I don't have enough clients, what should I be doing? Should I? And it's hard to kind of take that step back, but it's really important to remember who you are and what's important about you as a person. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your number two?
So number two, getting good at feeling helps healing.
Okay.
And this is something that I think has really evolved for me over the last 3 or 4 years. I remember a client mentioning Carl Davies' book. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a really great book. And he made the distinction between emotions, which come from the primitive part of our brain, which are instant, and thought generated emotions or feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And an old pattern that I had is if I felt an uncomfortable emotion, if I felt upset, frustrated, if I was experiencing a symptom, I would go into my head. I wasn't able to just be with that discomfort. I would chastise myself, I'd catastrophize, say I'm never going to get well. I might distract myself. I remember one time a few years ago being trolled on Twitter, and I was in a state of distress, and it's almost like I wasn't able to comfort myself.
Mm.
And my go-to strategy when I felt discomfort was to want to distract myself,
Yeah.
to go and watch an action movie, or I'd sometimes watch what we call gentlemen's movies, and it was a way of distracting myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to be very kind of ashamed of that, and now it's like I recognize. I think Gabor Mate says, our patterns are a way of dealing with our distress.
Yeah.
And when I got to the point of just understanding, actually, I can learn to just acknowledge what I'm feeling, identify what I'm feeling, acknowledge it, accept it. Okay, I am feeling upset right now.
Mm-hmm.
To be with that, to kind of process it, to make sense of it. Okay, one time a year ago, I was trolled by someone on one of the platforms. I think it was TikTok. And what I realized is that when someone criticized me, my instant default response was, I must be bad or wrong.
Mm-hmm. Me
And
too.
actually, when I realized that, I thought, actually, I'm not bad or wrong. If oh sorry, I don't know, that sometimes happens. Um Actually, I'm not bad or wrong. If I've made a mistake, that's okay. If this person disagrees with me, they could communicate with more compassion,
Yeah.
And this person was saying, I've got an MSc in psychology. Well, I've got a friend who's a PhD in psychology. And I know if I said this thing to him and he had some feedback, it would be done in a loving way, because
Mm-hmm.
he's a really loving, gentle person. And so that was kind of a light bulb moment. Actually, okay, I don't need to go and distract myself or chastise myself or catastrophize. I can just be with that discomfort. I can think about what do I really need? Well, I need to say to myself, actually, no, even if you have said something that someone disagrees with, you're still, it relates to what you were saying, your light bulb. I'm still a fine human being and I'm deserving of respect and kindness.
Yeah.
So that for me was massively enlightening just to understand. And I don't think I really understood that from learning brain training initially, because it was all about, okay, you've got a response that's unhelpful. Let's just say stop to it. And this is more about, oh, actually, no, let's embrace this and just make space for it
Yeah.
and space for processing what's going on so I can understand it and respond differently.
Yeah, that separation between what is a thought and what is a feeling. Thoughts we can change, feelings need to be felt. That was really big for me, and realizing too that I didn't really know how to feel my feelings. I
Yeah.
agree. I had that same light bulb moment, and actually that leads really well into my second one, which is realizing that my childhood was a piece of why I got ME/CFS. I remember about, halfway into my illness, I have a friend who's a counselor, and she said, Lindsay, this is a trauma illness. And I said, what are you talking about? My childhood was fine. And I just like totally shook her off like she was crazy. And I think I was even annoyed because it was like, this is a physical illness. This isn't just like a trauma or in my head, Of course, we go there. But the more you think about this aspect of feeling your feelings and how important that is, and what Gabor Mate found in his book, When the Body Says No, that people who get chronic illnesses have this similarity of repressed emotions. He sees this trend in all the subjects in his book that they don't really know how to express their emotions. And when I learned that, it made me reflect on my childhood and having a mother that is quite narcissistic, and I became quite a people pleaser. And I never learned to express anger or show anger or feel anger, even because it didn't feel safe. And
Mm.
learning that my childhood was a piece of why I became chronically ill was a really big piece for me. And accepting that, getting that repressed emotion out. A lot of people out there know about Dr. Sarno's work, Dr. John Sarno, who talks about chronic pain and also relays it to other chronic illnesses as well. That once people get out that repressed emotion, like there's a journaling technique called journal speak that I teach that came from Nicole Sachs. But once people can get out that emotion, the body starts to like let up this space for healing. And on the Huberman Lab podcast, he talked about how the reason they think that this works, there's been a lot of studies showing that it does work, people getting out emotion and then healing. And the reason he thinks it works is because it transfers the energy from this limbic brain, the one that's in fight or flight. It allows the transfer of energy back to your prefrontal cortex, where we're processing. That's where you process emotions. So instead of all our energy being wrapped up in our limbic fight or flight brain, we're now allowed to like use the energy up here for processing, and there's space to heal. So for me, all that comes back to my childhood. And for some people who've been sick a long time or older people, this can be a lot when they go into their childhood and start to link that to their chronic illness. So please work with a therapist if it feels overwhelming. And there are different strategies out there for working with emotions and feeling your emotions. So definitely look into that, or, make a call if you want strategies. But it was a big piece looking into my childhood and coming to terms, and forgiveness, and a lot of self-compassion was needed to
Yeah.
get there too, to get past that self-blame, and then understanding that, oh, poor little Lindsay had to deal with so much. And
Yeah.
actually, the reason I got to where I am, is a lot of struggle. I'm privileged in many ways, but there are still areas. Everyone can have big struggles that can cause, cumulative traumas. So
Yeah.
that can be a big piece of illness. And learning that was big for me.
Yeah. And I love what you just said about those two elements, compassion and forgiveness.
Hmm.
Part of my journey is realizing that, yeah, I did need to forgive. There were situations, there are things that happened in my past, which I have a better understanding of why those significant people in my life behaved the way that they did. And having that understanding meant that I was able to just to let go of a lot of anger and, unresolved emotions around that, those behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole conversation just about, you talked about having a Catholic upbringing. I had a like mother with a Jewish upbringing, and the interesting things that go along with that, a lot of guilt in the Jewish community. I know there's a lot of shame and stuff in Catholicism. So our childhoods really form our ability to process emotions and how we internalize them, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's fascinating. Yeah, so no, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah. What about your third?
Okay, so the third one for me, the third light bulb moment was really understanding that we all have these two intelligences, the emotional brain and the thinking brain,
Mhm.
and getting them to work together can really help with healing.
Mm.
So I've been doing a course called Mind Body Reconnect, which was created by Claire Caldwell, who was at one point a medical therapist and a head trainer. And what she talks about is that we've got these two intelligences. There's the emotional brain, and its primary roles are to keep you safe and to make sure that your life is fulfilling. And we also have the thinking brain, and there are two parts to the thinking brain. There's the problem solver. This is the part that listens to the thinking brain and takes appropriate action. And then we have the problem creator, and this is the part of us that can overthink, that can worry what people think, that can develop behaviors like you mentioned, people pleasing, etc. And when these two parts of our brain work together well, that results in health, energy, safety, fulfillment. When they don't work together well, the emotional brain communicates to us firstly by sending us emotions. So we might notice some discomfort in a situation. If we don't listen, then it'll turn up the volume on those emotions.
Mm.
If we keep ignoring that, then it'll start sending symptoms.
Mm.
And, those symptoms can be subtle to begin with, but they will become louder and louder. And if I think about what was happening before I got sick, my body was definitely sending me emotions and symptoms, but I didn't know how to respond to them.
Mhm.
And you many of us probably heard the expression, the body starts by whispering, and when we don't listen, it ends up screaming.
Mm.
And kind of that is what happened. That's why I got sick, because my body was screaming, you're not listening.
Okay.
And goes back to what you mentioned earlier. The first thing we need to do, Claire talks about the three C's. The first is curiosity. So
Mm.
rather than judging our emotions, judging our symptoms, judging ourselves for overdoing it or whatever, first of all, we get curious.
Mhm.
Then we bring compassion. So if I have overdone it, if I did get triggered yesterday by a conversation, I can have compassion for myself and just recognize, okay, that's a bit of information that tells me where I'm not yet free.
Mhm.
And the third thing we need is constructive action. Okay, we need to listen to our emotional brain. When we listen, the emotional brain says, Simon's listening. I don't need to keep sending this signal. And it stops sending those signals of emotions and symptoms, sensations, start sending emotions and positive energy. And I
Mm.
can give you a very concrete example of that. I had an interaction recently which didn't feel okay. I felt very uncomfortable about the way someone was communicating with me. In the past, I would have gone into my head, I'd have dismissed my feelings,
Mm.
or I would have locked in my emotion subconsciously. I wouldn't even realize I was feeling upset, angry, and that would result in tension in my body. And now I just thought, okay, I need to take action. And I was like, oh, do I really need to respond to this person? And it's like my thinking brain was going, yeah, you do, because otherwise you're going to be sitting with it and it's going to be stuck energy. So it was like the evening, I sat down for 20 minutes, I wrote an email. I sent it to someone, just said, can you give me some feedback? They gave me some feedback. I made some changes, made it a bit gentler. And I sent the email, I made a polite request for how I'd like to be treated. And I didn't get any response, but that was fine. My interpretation of that is they had no comeback,
Mm,
because this person can respond in a very defensive way.
mm,
And I just think my sense is the message was received.
mm.
And what I noticed is I felt energized as a result
Good.
of doing. So yeah, that's my third one. What's yours?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's been an issue with me too, is this like emotionally, like, then I'd ruminate and ruminate and ruminate of what I should have done, and how much it was probably my fault and make it into my fault. And yeah, changing it into, understanding this is an emotional response, like you say, and going through the steps, is a really wonderful idea. I think that's so good and important for people to understand, because initially people think listening to it, and then they start listening to their symptoms, and that's not what we're talking about, right? Don't focus on your symptoms. It's like a focusing on what's going on beneath the symptoms, right? And getting to that deeper layer is so important. So yeah,
Yeah,
I really think
yeah.
that.
I just want to respond to that because you've made an important point. In the past, and I'm sure many people can relate to this, if I noticed tiredness, my understanding was I needed to rest.
Mm,
And there might be times when that's appropriate, for instance, if I've got a virus, but there are other times when actually by going through that process of, oh, let's just check in. What am I noticing in my body? What sensations am I noticing? What emotions are around?
mhm,
Sometimes I realized I was feeling really frustrated towards myself,
mm,
and I needed to forgive myself. I needed to have more compassion for myself
mm,
for overdoing it.
yeah,
Other times, oh yeah, actually I'm feeling angry. I need to shake my body. I need to jump up and down. Um,
yeah,
and then I need to communicate something in a constructive way.
yeah.
And my energy would shift. And it's like, wow, in the past I would have gone to bed and fallen asleep. Now I feel energized because I've gone through those steps.
Yeah, we don't really realize how much like energy ruminating takes up, right? Because I didn't realize for at least the first year of my illness, I thought I was resting, but I wasn't resting. I was stressing, right? I was lying there being stressed about what's happening to my body. So that takes up a lot of energy on its own. So
Yeah.
yeah, I totally believe it. Yeah, my last one actually kind of ties in all of the things we've talked about, because man, when I got to my rock bottom and I was alone on that island and mostly bedbound, and I remember crawling outside because I lived on these cliffs, so beautiful. Literally, I saw whales every day. So beautiful, but so sick that I like was ready to jump off the cliffs. I was done. And I like asked for a sign from the universe, like, is it even worth it? Keep going. And this gust of wind came. I mean, take that as you will. Maybe it just was a gust, but it I came to this realization, and a lot of people do have to hit this rock bottom to get there, that I needed to make some structural change to my life, not just little things. What I've been trying, supplements, I'd take them for 5 days, 7 days, on to the next supplement, next. I spent thousands and thousands on supplements. I had bags full. I would try something, I'd try the next thing. I did fecal transplants. I did coffee enemas. I did all of these things to try to heal, but nothing was like consistent. And I was telling myself I'm not a person who can do routine, right? And by just telling myself that belief, changing that limiting belief was a big piece of what I needed. And by taking initiative, the privilege comes out here that I asked my stepdad for the money to take CFS Health, the program that started me on the healing journey, and, getting some structure in my life of doing some healing activities morning and night, And then between concentrating on what I call the healing CFS. I saw you have a version of this, but mine's an acronym. It's the healing CFS is coziness, which you can't be cozy and stressed at the same time. They just don't go together. Fun is the F, having fun in my life again. And the S is somatic. So just being in your body as much as possible in a positive way. The healing CFS, if you can incorporate that into your day instead of the worry and the pressure and the self-criticism, as I talked, it totally changed the structure of your life. Then my friends came to the island. They had an intervention. They got me back to Vancouver. They found me a place that feels safe. It feels like home. And I've been here now for 3 years, and I just needed that stability, the community. There's so many factors that go into healing, but it was a whole structural change that I needed. That feeling of support, that feeling of a safe place to heal, that structure I put in for my morning routine and my evening routine. I also did in that time a 3-month very intense diet, which I'm not recommending, but because it helped my candida, it did help. But I think what really helped was me proving to myself that I could do something consistently for 3 months, more than the actual diet itself. It's so interesting how that alone calms the nervous system to just prove to yourself that you can do it. Like you are the kind of person who can follow a routine, changing your initial limiting beliefs about yourself. So, yeah, to just that whole idea of how can I structurally, and am I willing to structurally change my life in order to heal? Because some of us, I've had clients who are CEOs in Silicon Valley and stuff, and truly they're not really willing to change the structure on which they've based their lives because it has got them very far financially, but it's done a big damage to their body, right?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to really confront whether or not there's some limiting beliefs that are keeping you sick, possibly, right?
Yeah.
Um, and are you willing to make those big changes? And for me, it's totally changed the direction of my life. Like sometimes I tell clients, like, because of brain retraining, I don't think I'm as funny as I used to be. Because I used to be really self-critical and funny, but like I'd rather be happy than
Yeah.
funny, right?
Yeah.
So now I wake up happy every morning. So that's a much better way to live. So it's structural changes. Are you really willing to make them? Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting because you reminds me that when I was first sick, I had no structure,
Mm.
and in fact, I was pretty chaotic. And I remember one time not having a shower for 2 or 3 days, and possibly I could have done, but I just wasn't, because my energy was fickle.
Mm.
I could have made that a priority. Um, and not done other things which weren't as vital. And it is when I started putting some structures in place,
Mm.
and that didn't come naturally to me, that things, started to shift. And I love your acronym. And actually, I didn't even realize, as you said it, I was thinking, oh, actually, I do talk about connection, fun, and stimulation, i.e., we need, to
Mm.
be, our mind needs some
That's a good one
engagement.
too.
So
Hmm.
I love that. I love that you've created an acronym out of CFS.
The helix CFS. Yeah, I have to switch it. Yeah, but that's interesting what you're saying there about needing more structure too. I have to also say that like some people, because a very big quality of a lot of people who get this illness is perfectionism. Some people I'm sure out there saying, I don't need help with structure. I have no problem with structure and like giving myself routine. Some people need less, actually. Some people need more, like myself, who needed to prove to myself I could do it. Some people need to like release the reins a little bit around structure and how their life is so methodical. So it actually can be the either extreme, depending on the.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, we can get too rigid, we can get too chaotic.
Mhm.
There's a kind of sweet spot, and some people thrive more taking an intuitive approach.
Mhm.
And I like the analogy of a tent. It has some structure. You have the old tents, they had the poles, but then you have the fabric which has some flexibility. So I
Hmm.
think everyone's got to find their own recipe.
Yeah, that is a really good way to explain it. Yeah, because it's not all the same for everyone, but it really is all based in like self-compassion because whether I'm being hard on myself for my chaotic life and my lack of structure, or I'm being hard on myself in a perfectionist way, it's the same thing in the end. It's just finding that self-compassion and getting more of what you need, actually.
Yeah, and actually what, you mentioning the fun, I remember there were times, and I was talking about this earlier today, that I was being too strict with myself
Hmm.
in terms of, I must be here, I must go to bed at this time, I must do this.
Yeah,
And then there's part of me that would rebel against that
yeah.
and stay up late and go to the other extreme. So it was definitely, I realized actually I need to have a little bit of structure, but I also need to make sure I'm doing stuff that's fun. It's like I wouldn't pick up the guitar for ages. And when I picked it up, I didn't want to stop
Hmm.
because I'd been depriving myself. And I thought, well, actually, if I just pick it up every day, then I won't have that same, compulsion to play the guitar for hours.
Mm.
And actually, that is part of my daily routine now. I'm learning the piano,
Mm.
and I've committed to spending at least 5 minutes every day playing the piano. And even if I'm really tired, I can do 5 minutes, and it brings me such pleasure.
Nice.
Um,
Yeah. Oh,
I
that
love that.
self-confidence that you can do it, right? Like, yeah, there's something really strong to that that I see in clients that just doing a program sometimes is more, it's not so much what you do, it's how you do it that
Yeah.
brings the healing and the consistency is so key. So it doesn't matter what it is. And finding that also fun in your life is so key too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I found what you said about, doing the diet thing for 3 months and, learning you could stick to something. That's really interesting and important, I think. A while back, I did this 1 minute challenge where I invited people to do just one thing for 1 minute every day. It
Mm.
might be meditate, it might be, for me, I decided to do a 1 minute of weeding every day because I don't really like weeding, but I like seeing a weed-free front garden, back garden.
Mm.
And one of the people in my group really, she was like the star pupil. She did it for months, and I think one of her things was doing some weeding. One was to groom her dog every day. And she said she got so much from just doing this thing for 1 minute. Um, so I love what you say about kind of, finding a rhythm, thinking, wow, I can do this for 3 months. And
Yeah.
that can have a big effect on how you feel about yourself.
It really can. Yeah. And it's like, from a IFS, internal family system parts work view, it's like proving to yourself that your true self can be the leader, and your parts don't need to take over all the time. You
Yeah.
can lead from your true self. And that, these parts feel safe with that. Before they weren't so sure they could trust the true self. So for me, that was a big piece of it. And like getting my dog was also a big piece of it too, because it was a big I was only able to up to walking about an hour when I got my dog, but I just knew, I just knew that this would be helpful in my journey and I trusted that. And since then her and I have gone on all these hikes and adventures and stuff and having someone to love outside of myself and all has been good for me. There's so many advantages to that. And people would be like, "Aren't you scared you're going to crash again?" And I'm like, no, because now I have the tools. And that's something I really tell people a lot is that, I understand that fear of it happening again, but you have to just keep telling yourself it'll be okay because I have tools now and I'll figure
Yeah.
it out. So,
Yeah. And that's a big distinction. That's a big difference, isn't it? There's a point when I didn't have those tools
mhm,
and I feel so resourced because I've got a bunch of tools in my toolbox.
yeah, it's different. And even though sometimes I go off track, like I don't do, and things get stressful, but I know they're still there. So once I start to feel symptoms, I get right back to it. So, Yeah, it's there. Oh, this has been so helpful. I hope for people. I think it's been really helpful for me to hear yours and I we really are on the same track, hey?
Absolutely. No, it's been great having this conversation with you, and I've kind of taken a lot from what you've shared.
Mm,
And I've just got two final questions before we finish.
sure.
What's the name of your dog, and what sort of dog is it?
Winnie is my dog, and she's a little Bichon rescue from Mexico. Yeah, she's the love of my life for sure. How about you? You have dogs?
No, no. The only pets I have are unwelcome guests.
Oh,
In London, we have mice
yeah.
often, but they're all out for the summer. They're all on their summer holiday, so
Oh, good.
they're not around at the moment.
Yeah, I love my baby. So everyone on the podcast knows my obsession with animals.
It's been a lot of fun. So
Yeah, really nice talking to you, Simon.
thanks for the suggestion that we collaborate. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.